Early August 2026, the northern Arabian Sea, south of Iran. On the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, a loop is running, and it does not stop. A catapult throws a fighter off the bow. Minutes later, another one comes back, catches a wire, and goes from landing speed to a dead stop in about 2 seconds. It gets towed clear, fueled, inspected, rearmed, then queued up to be thrown off the bow again. All day, all night. One day into the next. What made that first week of August worth looking at is that the shooting had already stopped. The consecutive night strikes against Iran ended in the last days of July, and negotiators went back to the table. The loop on the deck did not change its rhythm. A blockade was still in force, and a blockade is not enforced with bombs. It is enforced with presence. And every turn of that loop is a controlled act of damage aimed at the aircraft itself. The catapult drives load into the airframe. The wire drags it back through the landing gear and the tailhook. In between, the aircraft sits outdoors in sea air, under hot exhaust washing off the jets parked around it. The force doing the most damage to these airplanes was never fired at them. It was their own operating cycle. By early August, that ship had been running that cycle for more than 200 days without touching a pier, longer than any modern carrier has managed. So how is anything still flying? The answer is in the hangar underneath the flight deck, where the maintainers were racing chemistry and tired metal with what they brought from San Diego and could not buy more of. At Navy Decoded, we do not count how many aircraft a ship carries. We look for the price, because every capability consumes the thing that produces it, and the only question worth asking is who pays that down. The Lincoln left San Diego in late November of 2025 and stopped at Guam for 2 days in mid-December. That was the only port call of the entire deployment. The war with Iran opened on the 28th of February 2026, and aircraft from Carrier Air Wing 9 flew in the opening strikes. Across the 40-day campaign that followed, that air wing launched thousands of sorties against Iran's southern axis. What came after it was a naval blockade. This ship was the instrument of, until mid-July, when a run of night strikes lasting nearly 2 weeks reopened the shooting. The strikes stopped again at the end of July. The blockade did not. The deployment put 2 very different kinds of work on the same set of airframes. The strike phases meant aircraft leaving the deck and coming back significantly heavier. The blockade phase meant lighter loads and no stopping point at all. It demands continuous presence, hour after hour over water, and by early August it had numbers attached. 35 merchant vessels turned back, 4 stopped outright. 2 different kinds of wear, and neither outranks the other. The same airframes took a 40-day strike campaign, then months of continuous presence, then 2 more weeks of night strikes, with no port call anywhere in it. So when the shooting stopped, the hangar bay did not get easier. It changed jobs. Now the number that frames all of this. A Nimitz-class carrier is designed to sustain about 120 launches and recoveries a day across a 12-hour flight day, and to hold that for 30 days before its maintenance reserve has to be built back up. 30 days and then a reset. That is the assumption in the design. But the whole model of naval aviation maintenance depends on that reset actually arriving. A port call, a window to pay back whatever was deferred. Deferring work is legitimate as long as somewhere exists to defer it to. On this deployment, for more than 200 days, nowhere did. Which makes the first question the most concrete one available. What does a single launch and a single recovery take out of an airplane? 2 forces work on the airframe every time it flies. One comes from the ship it launches off. The other comes from the sea it sits in. Neither is aimed at it. A catapult stroke takes an airframe from a standstill to flying speed in about 300 feet. All of that force running through the nose gear into the main structural members. The recovery is harder, and it is not a landing. There is no flare. The aircraft is flown into the deck, the tailhook grabs a wire, and the entire kinetic energy of the airplane funnels through one attachment point at the tail, while the fuselage is dragged backward at 3 to 4.5 G. Neither event breaks anything. Not yet. And that is the danger. Metal under repeated load does not fail on the first cycle. It accumulates, each cycle pushing a microscopic defect a little further along until the crack is long enough that what remains cannot carry the load. Fatigue cracking. And at the stage where it matters most, it sits under the paint, invisible to the eye. What governs how fast it accumulates is weight. Two schedules showing identical sortie counts can burn structural life at completely different rates. Expensive part is not the launch, it is the return. The maximum weight at which an aircraft may take a wire sits far below the weight at which it may be catapulted off. So anything coming home with weapons still on the racks arrives at exactly the weight the wire has to stop. That has a name in the design file, bring back, and it is a requirement, not a bonus feature. The FA-18EF was built to land with up to 9,000 pounds of unexpended ordnance still aboard. The F-35C has to trap while still carrying two 2,000-pound weapons and a pair of air-to-air missiles. Anything past that budget gets dropped on the target or goes into the sea before the landing pattern. A 40-day strike campaign in the spring and 2 more weeks of it in July did not only burn fuel and ordnance, they drew on the fatigue life of the structure at a rate the same number of light sorties would never reach. Then there is chemistry. The stealth of an F-35C is not only its shape, it is the radar-absorbent coating over the whole airframe. And inside that coating are microscopic iron particles, put there to swallow electromagnetic energy. The airframe is mostly composite. Composite does not rust. Iron powder does. Put that coating into saturated air carrying chloride ions, and the reaction runs. Nobody starts it. It does not stop at the end of a shift. After a few months deployed, reddish-brown streaks appear on the surface. What degrades is not the paint, but the radar cross-section itself, the exact capability that costs $100 million per airframe. The same air goes down the intake, where salt at operating temperature stops behaving like salt and starts eating the coatings on turbine blades from the inside. So the thing attacking the most expensive aircraft on that deck, every hour of every one of those days, never fired a shot. It was the air. All of that has a unit of measure. Maintenance man-hours per flight hour, the exchange rate between time in the air and time below deck. The F-35A, built for a runway, sits at 4.79. The F-35C, the same aircraft rebuilt to survive the catapult, the wire, and the sea air, sits at 7.55 as last officially reported. Same core design. Everything the carrier adds to it gets paid for twice. Once in the weight the airframe carries, and again in the labor it takes to keep that airframe flying. The price of every hour in the air goes up by about half, and when that price climbs high enough, it stops staying in the shop. An F-35C may hold Mach 1.3 in afterburner for a cumulative total of 50 seconds. The pilot cannot slow down and speed back up to earn more. That limit came out of test flights where thermal friction in that regime damaged the tail, and the Pentagon chose to handle it procedurally rather than engineer a fix. The need to protect the airframe did not stay in the hangar. It climbed into the cockpit and rewrote the flight envelope. So every flying night ends with a set of airframes slightly worse than the night before, mostly in ways nobody can see. But how do you find that when the depot is on the other side of the world? On land, anything beyond a squadron's ability goes back to a depot. At sea, the depot is 8,000 nautical miles away, and nothing in the inventory can carry an airframe there. So the Navy splits maintenance into 3 levels, and the middle one is what makes going to sea possible at all. Squadrons work their own aircraft on the deck. The depot ashore handles overhaul. Between them sits the ship's own intermediate maintenance department, doing deep repair and inspection in the middle of the ocean. Everything it can fix is something that does not have to cross 8,000 nautical miles, and one detail says everything about the philosophy behind it. That department nearly doubles its manning when the ship deploys, with detachments from readiness centers ashore sailing along. The factory only reaches full size once it leaves the pier, and even then, it is a fixed number for the next 8 months. The crack nobody can see has people whose entire job is to hunt it, technicians who look through metal without destroying it. The first method uses a changing magnetic field to induce eddy currents circulating inside a conductive material. A crack distorts the path those currents take, and the change in impedance shows up on an instrument. That reads a crack sitting underneath the paint without stripping the paint off. The second sends high-frequency sound into the structure and measures the echo. That one matters most for composite, where the failure mode is not a crack at all. It is delamination, damage entirely internal with a surface that still looks perfect. These technicians are not looking for what has failed. They are looking for what has not failed yet, but is going to, in noise, in vibration, on a deck that is moving. Restoring the coating is slower still. Where corrosion has started, it gets cleaned back with non-metallic tools because a metal tool creates a fresh galvanic couple of its own, treating one spot by seeding the next. Then the coating has to cure, and curing wants stable temperature and humidity. But the hangar bay opens onto the sea, and summer in the northern Arabian Sea is the peak of the southwest monsoon. Hot, saturated, windy. The room that job requires does not exist on that ship, so the work is either deferred or done below specification, and both have a price. And nothing signs itself off. The authority to release an aircraft as safe for flight is held only by people designated in writing by the commander and exercised only after cross-checking the maintenance records, the engine logs, and the oil consumption reports. That is the point where the entire condition of an airframe reduces to one person and one signature. This factory is good, and it was built by people who knew exactly what they were up against. But it has a hard ceiling, and that ceiling is not skill. Sometimes the ship simply cannot fix it. And rather than treat that as failure, the Navy turned it into a coded system. When a component exceeds what can be repaired aboard, it gets tagged with a reason. One code means the ship lacks the equipment for the job. Another means it could do the job, but a part inside does not exist anywhere in the inventory. The system records why it failed, not merely that it failed. And over a long campaign, the code that dominates is the one whose cause lies outside the ship entirely. Missing parts. Then there's the hardest move on the board. A fighter needs a part to fly tonight, and supply has none, so it comes off another aircraft already down for maintenance. Tactically, that is correct. The shortage moves from an airframe about to launch to one already off the schedule. But the part gets pulled twice and logged twice, so the work being moved is larger than the work that was there to begin with. And what it spends is maintenance hours. Done often enough, much of it never even reaches the books, and the readiness picture ashore ends up brighter than the one on the deck. None of which is a criticism of the crew. They chose correctly. The system put them where the choice had to be made. There is one more ledger, and it was supposed to be automatic. The F-35 tracks its own component health through a logistics system built for land bases with fiber, running instead on narrow satellite bandwidth. One Air Force unit estimated more than 45,000 man-hours a year on manual workarounds because of it. Labor a computer was supposed to carry moved onto human time. Here is where all of it lands as a number. Across fiscal year 2025, the F-35 fleet finished with 44% of airframes able to fly at least one of their assigned missions, down from 67% 4 years earlier. And among the causes officially listed, alongside parts shortages, is a word that has been in this video since the beginning. Corrosion. That describes the problem, it does not grade the people solving it. Because everything so far has been a material shortage, parts, benches, bandwidth. The scarcest thing on that ship in its 8th month was not in any storeroom. The Navy does not manage heat with an ordinary thermometer. It uses an index that folds humidity, wind, and sun into the temperature, then flies a colored flag that dictates work and rest cycles. At 90 degrees, the flag turns black, essential operational tasks only. In those waters at that time of year, the heat index runs near 125, and enclosed spaces are rated a level worse than whatever is measured outside. The hangar bay is one of them. A single launch reaches 150 decibels. Double hearing protection attenuates about 30. The rest goes into the ear, and the deck runs on hand signals. And when sleep debt gets large enough, the brain begins forcing microsleeps lasting 5 to 15 seconds. The eyes stay open. The hands still hold the tool. Nothing arriving from outside is being processed. After an incident, investigators can measure blood alcohol. They can measure carbon monoxide. There is no test that measures how tired somebody was at the moment it happened. Every mechanism in this story moves a shortfall somewhere else. The remaining question is where that somewhere else is. An erosion cycle that does not stop. A factory with a hard ceiling and a set of mechanisms for moving the overflow somewhere else. Not one of those mechanisms erases damage. They only choose where it lands. And when every route has been used, no aircraft left to strip, no port to defer to, it lands in the only place remaining. The judgment of a person standing under an airplane at 3 in the morning. Parts can be flown out to a carrier, so can fresh crews. What cannot is the accumulated knowledge of exactly what each of these airframes has already been through. The same ship, the same air wing, went to the Middle East in 2024. 5 months, with port calls, the hardware and people and procedures all unchanged. The only variable that moved was time without a reset, and moving a debt only means something when a due date exists. So here's what actually happened. Across more than 200 days, that ship did not miss a cycle it was ordered to run. The standing record for consecutive days at sea had already been left behind in mid-July, and the loop kept going after that. That was not achieved by beating chemistry. Nobody beats chemistry. It was achieved through judgment. Thousands of times, one airframe at a time, which defect is safe to carry tonight and which one is not. There is no checklist for that decision. No software produces it. It comes from someone 16 hours into a shift under a black flag who knows exactly what this particular aircraft has been through and who signs their name to it. It is the kind of skill that never shows up on a readiness report because what it produces is things that did not happen. The flight that was not canceled. The crack caught before it grew. What kept those aircraft flying was not the technology on them. It was more than 5,000 people who never got ashore, holding a system together well past the point where its design stopped. There is a layer underneath even this one. What decides how long a ship can stay out there before maintenance ever becomes the question? The replenishment chain and the logistics ships nobody films. That is where Navy Decoded goes next. This one ends where it began. A catapult throws one off the bow. A wire brings one back. The loop runs day and night, and every turn takes a piece of the airplane with it. Which means what the ship produces was never sorties. What it manufactures every day in a hot steel compartment beneath the runway is restored airframes. And that factory never quite keeps pace with the loop above it. So the thing keeping aircraft flying off CVN-72 in the summer of 2026 was not a repair shop. It was a triage architecture, built to decide which damage is allowed to fly tonight and to move the rest wherever it does the least harm. It does not defeat wear, it routes wear, and it does that better than any system that has ever gone to sea. And when negotiators went back to the table in early August, the loop on the deck kept running. A blockade does not end because a conference room has its lights on. But the last component in that architecture is not a procedure. It is a person 8 months without shore leave, signing a logbook before an airplane is allowed to leave the deck. That is the part worth carrying out of this. Every system run past its design point becomes a triage system, and the engineering question stops being whether something can be fixed. It becomes where this lands. And in every system with a human inside the loop, the answer is the same place. If the scarce resource on a carrier is man-hours rather than spare parts, then the thing worth designing next may not be a stealthier aircraft. It may be a cheaper one, measured in human time.